All right.
Hey Johnny, how you doing, brother?
Hey,
It's it's
I'm
it's
doing well.
been it's been too long. We miss you here in Seattle. So thankful that you've been able to be out there in Maui with your family. You're in the ocean. You're foiling all the time. You're surfing. You're having a great time. I'm back here in Washington. Of course, we're both shelter in place in our respective areas. But given the lakes in my backyard, I'm getting out there in a safe way, having a great time. Behind the boat, mostly wake foiling, trying some different foils. And in this video today, what I was hoping we could do is just kind of talk about foiling. Let's what's going on in the foiling world. I know here in terms of people are able to get out and do a little bit of kiting now, safely, appropriately distanced and everything. Behind the boat, family members, or typically it's just a couple guys, so it's 6 feet apart. What's happening there in Maui? Like, are you able to get out and go prone foiling?
Yeah. Well, in Maui, things have been locked down pretty tight, right? Basically, they put the 14-day mandatory quarantine on early. That happened, I think, a little later in March, and it essentially shut down all tourism. Um, that said, they left the beaches open. They closed all the beach parks, so you couldn't park at the beach parks, any of that. They didn't want people gathering in large groups, but you still could. It was one of the few places where you still could go out in the ocean for exercise. So you could, as long as you were getting to the beach, you were out in the water, and then you're immediately back to your car.
Yeah.
You could do that. So
Yeah.
all that being said, it allowed you, to be able to go in the ocean to foil. And so really, guys and gals have been out foiling like crazy,
Good.
surfing like
Good.
crazy. You know, I
Get
think
get
it's
get the daily stoke. That's awesome. One of the things
yeah,
that as with all of our how to wake foil videos that are out there, one of the questions that has come up, and I'm hoping we could talk about a little bit, is what is it like to transition from one foiling sport to another? You and I have spent a ton of time behind a boat wake foiling. You've surfed. You're a better surfer than I am. I'm okay. But when you look at going from wake foiling behind the boat to prone surf foiling, like, what's that transition look like? How have you benefited from being behind the boat? And what has that transition been like to you to kind of get out there and prone foil surf?
right. That's a good question. So transitioning from surf foiling to going from behind the boat is it's pretty big, but I would say the good news is, but hands down, the best way to get familiar with the foil and how it works and how to ride a foil and elevate a foil is behind a boat. And it doesn't have to be a big boat that puts up a big wake. I
Yeah.
think if you have a boat that does that, or even a smaller boat where you can drop the rope on the foil, you get so much time on foil that you become confident controlling it. You're able to ride it, to turn it,
Yeah.
and even behind a jet ski. So out here, what you see is there's tons of people that will transition from surfing or supping to foiling, but maybe they're coming at it with no time on foil. They haven't been behind a boat, and they're just getting out in the ocean. And if you do that, if you go straight to the ocean, it's going to be rough. And the reason why it's going to be rough is because, just as anyone that's ridden a foil knows, especially behind the boat, when you first get on it, you don't know what's going on. You
Yeah, right.
elevate
As you get
and you
that
bring,
the wild ride, it's bouncing on you, and if your foot position's a little bit off left or right, the thing's turning
yeah.
on you pretty hard.
And the thing in the ocean that compounds that is just the fact that you're riding a foil, and you do not want to tangle with the foil. Well, if you're getting tossed in the white water or you drop into a wave, which most people with a surfing or supping background, they're pretty good at catching waves. They might know their spots. As soon as they get that first ride, if they've never ridden the foil, they're gonna breach. It's gonna elevate, and
Yeah.
they're
Yeah.
they're on the ride, and that can be really, really, really unsettling at first. So I've talked to a number of people out here where, you know, maybe they were excited, they were stoked, they got their foil, they went out in the ocean and they said, holy crap, like I'm going to kill myself out here. You know, what's
Yeah.
this thing? And so it takes a little time, right? It just like anything, it takes a little time. But what I would say is having experience behind a boat, and most guys will tell you out here, like, look, if you have a friend that has a jet ski or a dinghy or something where you can get a constant pull, get up on that foil, start to learn how it works. That's really something you want to do. It's
Yeah.
advantageous. And so, you know, for me, I had spent a ton of time behind the boat, and I was really comfortable riding the foil. So for me, the transition was, okay, how do you apply your surfing background with a foil under you to the ocean? And even then, with surfing experience and with foiling experience, it was a transition, because once you're in the ocean, as anyone that's been out there knows, you know, it's unpredictable. The boat, predictable. You get up on the
Yeah.
rope, here's where the
Yeah.
wave's going to be. In the ocean, you got white water coming at you. You've got to paddle in, paddle out.
You
So
might have
there's that
you might
nuance.
you might have a full set. You know, I think when you fall on a
Right.
boat, you know, of course, as we've covered in our videos, how to fall safely, you can hold on to the rope, you can dive away from the board. You know, it's so much more controllable. You're there in a wave. If that thing starts to tumble, you gotta cover your head and everything. I think for me, having it not done as much as you have, but I have been out there in prone flying, I think one of the interesting things was in terms of getting up. You know, for surfing, I worked a decent amount of time to be able to catch that wave early and try to be in the green, you know,
Right.
as opposed to having it be like a whitewater ride. I kind of like, I mean, now I'm like, catch a wave. I don't care if you're in the white, you're the green, you're having a great time. But when I'm surfing, I always want to catch it early so I can get a nice green and try to stay to the top. The thing that was interesting for me in terms of how to catch a wave when you're prone foiling is don't be afraid of catching something in the white water, because you're in a gentler part of the wave and you can work your way to that. I mean, is that how it's held out? Like when you're
Yeah,
first catching
yeah.
waves, what do you do?
Um, well, at first, you just want to catch waves, and you want the waves that you're catching. What you're looking for, you know, when you're transitioning to prone or surf, is just getting a steady push. Just getting out to where you have steady momentum out in front of the white water is great, because then if it's steady, then you can elevate and go, oh, okay, I know how to pop up. I know how to go from my prone position onto my feet and then elevate the foil. And the cool thing is, once you elevate the foil, you really understand how efficient that foil is. And so even if you're, you know, the real thing you want to look for when you're transitioning to prone foiling is you don't, until you start getting really comfortable, you don't want steep drops. So it's almost
Gotcha.
advantageous if you have a wave that picks up and it's kind of mushy, it doesn't have a ton of power, but it's enough to get you in. Even if you're in front of the white water and say it reforms,
Yeah.
that's ideal, because it's just a steady transition. You got enough speed to get that board moving, and then you're on foil. And once you're on foil, that's the beauty of foiling, is that, you know, a spot that normally you're done surfing the wave, or you just have white water that's kind of reforming and it's not real exciting on a surfboard, on a foil, it's
Yeah.
incredible, right?
Yeah.
Because you
Yeah.
can, now you're efficient, and so you can get out in front, you can pump as it reforms, you're back in it. And so that's what's so cool about foiling, is it opens up so much opportunity for what people would consider nothing or a garbage surf
Right.
spot.
Well, I think
And it,
that's one of the cool things too behind a boat. You know, and we've seen this like behind my ski boat, which is a terrible wake surf boat. But on a foil, it opens that up. And then when you get a bigger boat, you open up so much ground that you can cover quickly on
Absolutely.
foil between it. And when I've watched, guys like yourself or Skyrama or Bones and those guys out there, the amount of real estate, the usable wave just goes up exponentially compared to surfing, which is so cool.
That's true. Yeah. What you'll see and, being out here, I would say you just have people that are on the bleeding edge of foiling innovation out here. So, whether you're talking about on a wing or on a prone board or what you can do on a sup, you see it firsthand, and it's absolutely mind blowing because you'll see guys out here that they're on a wave and they're foiling, and it's here's the break. This is the spot. Here's the peak, and you might have two peaks that are 100 yards, 150, 300 yards away, and they're able to drop in, pump across to this wave, pump back out to the next zone, pump over to the next zone, and this is all in
Yeah.
one ride. So you're seeing guys doing all sorts of crazy stuff out here, guys and gals, sup, prone. It's really inspiring, and to watch them do and unlock what's possible on a foil is really great, and it just kind of opens your eyes. And so the other thing I think, at least that it feels like that I'm seeing is that, more people are gravitating to it, and it opens up these possibilities. Because even on the wind side, you've got guys that are coming from kiting or windsurfing, and then they're getting familiar with the foil. Maybe it's not that prone surfing bent to it. It's more
Yeah.
coming from the wind sport, and the stuff that they're doing on the wings is really cool too. So it's
Well,
yeah.
yeah, and I think that the thing that's interesting is that, when it comes to foiling, it's time on water. And at least what our experience has been is once you start to do it, you're addicted. I mean, like
Right.
I know for at least wakefoiling behind the boat, you're no longer dealing with just cuts left and right. You're dealing with elevation from high to low. And so when you come into a bottom turn, not only are you doing a bottom turn, but you can do an elevation to sink down and then to come back up. And so it's like wake surfing in the third dimension, behind the boat. And then when you take that skill and you take it over to prone, you're opening up a whole new bit of waves. And the thing is, whether you're on a larger foil or a smaller foil, it's going to be cross sport discipline. So if you're an old time windsurfer and you want to put that on your windsurf board and you're going to do that, great. If you're a kiter, the kite foiling guys are having a great time. I don't think we need to see a lot more to know that like foiling isn't just a fad that's just here for today. I mean, it's something that is opening up new water, new ways of thinking about these different sports. It's going to be around for a while.
Yeah, it's that's definitely true. And it's the other thing I would say though too is it's really a cool time to get into the sport, because the reality is the foils, I mean, they've been around for a long time, but to do it behind waves the way that it's happening now and with the wings, it's the potential's been unlocked. But the feeling about foiling, even at surf breaks, is the bottom line. You're going to be out there with people that, you know, they've just learned within the past year, within the past 2 years,
Yeah.
and so there's a there's there's a real good attitude, I would say, out in the water where, hey, everybody's relatively new,
Yeah.
and they've all kind of put their time in, and they've all had the fear of being up on foil and they're breaching. The bottom line is, whether you're going out on a surfboard or on the wing for the first time, you're going to be taking your walks of shame. You're going to be breaching. You're going to be, it's all brand new. And so
Yeah.
everyone's in that boat, but at the same time, everyone is extremely helpful
Yeah.
in I would
That's
say
cool.
just the foiling community, where I've learned so much from a lot of guys out here where they're just like, hey, on the foil, when you're prone foiling, you're thinking about it about like surfing to catch the waves, but you have to remember on the prone foil, scoot up on your board further than you think when you're trying to catch the wave. It feels
Yeah.
counterintuitive, but the reality is with the foil under you, it you're balancing out the lift of the foil as you're catching the wave.
Yeah.
And so little tips and things like that, people are willing to give give the help bring people into the sport, help them progress. And so
Yeah.
it's really great. It's just an exciting time
Well,
for foiling in general.
yeah, and I found that too when I was over there at the end of January, and I went over to the harbor on Maui, and here I am with a bunch of people. Whether that's Dave Kalama, Bones actually was out there. I don't know him, but you've got to know him. A bunch of Maui locals who've been in those waters for a lot of years. This is their home turf, and I get that when I go over there. I'm a total kook, coming off the wave, and I'm prone, I'm prone foiling for I think it was like the third time. They were so friendly, helpful, and just excited to share the stoke. And I think that's the thing about where foiling is right now is it's opening up those new areas and just kind of a feeling for at least the people who are water people and love to do those water sports. It's a whole new world. And so, what you've been able to, you spend most of your time at Guardrails, right? Which is out towards Lahaina. And I think a lot of the foiling, at least, in terms of the prone foiling, a lot happens over there in the harbor on the North Shore. And then the other crews kind of out there at Guardrails, and depending on conditions, you guys go back and forth. But the nice thing is you've been able to be out there and meet a lot of these people and learn from them and kind of get a feeling at least like where their heads at around foiling.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. The other thing I would mention though too is if you're traveling, once the traveling
Yeah.
and some of the stuff subsides, um, a good thing to do is just ask around. I feel like foiling doesn't have kind of some of the surf stuff has localism, especially some of the better breaks or whatever. You
Yeah.
probably don't want to say, hey, I'm going to go to this secret spot, local spot, and paddle out. But with foiling, there's certain breaks that are conducive to like prone foiling. There's certain spots that are good for the wind foiling that might not be your best first time spot. But the reality is like if you do come out here and you have a background riding the foil behind the boat and you have a surfing background, you want to put it together, you want to try prone foiling. Like if you go to High Tech right by the airport in Kahului, they'll tell you the spots to go, and hey, here's a good spot. There's a lot of beginners out there. It's safe, because the one thing about it that I've found is you need the right spots and the right tides for the spots. Guardrails is a place that if there's swell, it's usually collecting the swell and it's breaking in relatively deeper water. But there's a lot of spots out here that are more shallow water spots.
Yeah.
And if you paddle out with your foil, you're going to spend more time bouncing off the reef and ruining that foil than you are catching waves. So, there are some specific spots and some specific times in terms of the tide that are better to get out there. And, that's the thing. You just want clearance. Getting in and out of the water with the foil is another thing too. It's kind of cumbersome. You got that mast and you've got, the wings. And so, you just take your time and that's the thing. You ask others like, hey, how do you paddle in? How do you paddle out of this spot?
Right.
I'm not really sure. And people be more than willing and more than happy to help and point in the right direction.
And just like from a safety perspective, of course, if you're new to prone foil surfing, don't get yourself really close to other people because you have to learn how to manage it. Be careful when you go into the break. And I think what you've seen is people are helpful in terms of giving you a little bit of space, when you're getting into it. And of course, wearing an impact vest, maybe a helmet as you're learning is a good idea because you have the unpredictability of the ocean that's going to pick you up and potentially tumble you. It turns out those foils could be rather uncomfortable if they make contact with you. I know for behind the boat, one of our biggest teaching points is around foot position. And you talked a little bit about the pop up. And so when you're paddling into the wave, you can stay further forward on your board to hold that down. Can you talk a little bit about foot position? Because there's a lot more when we're behind the boat. We can almost get our feet perfectly set before we actually get up on foil.
That's
Obviously,
right.
when you're
Yeah.
paddling into a wave and you're doing the pop to kind of get there, how long did it take you to learn to kind of get your feet in the right spot, and how critical is that?
Um, it it definitely took a little bit of time. Um, like with your board, you want to get, it's very helpful to get your board set up out of the gate correctly. A good way to do that though is, if you're buying your board, if you're buying your board online, you probably want to go online and watch some videos in terms of where you would want to put your foot pads, in your back foot pad especially. The mast position is really important, and then that would translate where your foot position is. But of course, if you can set up your board to where you might have a tail pad, and where
Yeah,
that tail pad's set up, you have it set up in the right spot. So then that's where you get your feedback from, is that tail pad placement. So intuitively, I know that the back of my tail pad, like that's it. I don't want to be back behind that and then forward, you can know. Because the thing with foot position, and it's different versus prone versus sup. So on your sup, you can kind of have your feet placed, and then you're paddling, and then, you're kind of good. You're in a good
yeah,
spot
right,
to ride
right.
that foil. The thing with prone is it's similar to surfing. And as you're catching that wave and you pop up, your feet are going to land where they land, right? Like typically you have things set up okay and they're landing in a certain spot. But what I found with foot position on prone is that you're going to want to do little micro adjustments, and those adjustments make a big difference. And so, once you get at first you're going to catch the wave, pop up, your feet are going to be where they're going to be, and then you're going to elevate, right? And it's really about, I would say, what you want to concentrate on, that if you're just coming to prone foiling, is literally don't try to make turns, don't try to do anything too crazy. The only thing you want to do is catch the wave, pop up, elevate the foil, and sustain the ride. Even if you're going straight, even if you're
Yeah,
not going down the line yet, you're just steady pop up, elevate
gotcha.
the foil, and sustain the ride. Almost like, behind the boat, we have some videos where it's like, okay, behind the boat, bring it up, bring it back down, bring it
Right.
up, bring it back down. And then you'll kind of get it. And what you'll find about your foot position on the prone is you're popping up, you might need to micro adjust your feet a little bit. And it's the same thing in prone, where like if you're not getting any lift at all, you probably need to move that mass forward, right?
Yeah,
If
yeah,
you're if you're getting too much lift, and as soon as you pop on, you're flying out, then you need to move it back. But the typical thing that I see with foot position, especially in the ocean, when you're transitioning to prone, especially, is 9 times out of 10, no matter what, everyone out of the gate's going to overfoil. It's just the way it
oh,
is. And I think it's because intuitively, and even from surfing, you're catching that wave, you've got a lot of power, you get the speed, and it's bringing your weight back, you overfoil, and then you crash.
yeah,
Catch the wave,
yeah,
overfoil, and then you crash. And so, the foot position and the weighting, you got to make that connection of keeping your weight forward, which is somewhat counterintuitive,
yeah,
but it's catch the wave, you start to elevate, and then you're putting your weight forward. And
yeah, yeah,
and so what I would say about foot position is some of it's just repetition. You're gonna pop up where you pop up and where your feet land, and then you just micro adjust from there.
Yeah, but at a minimum, you're trying to similarly behind the boat where you're trying to get your feet to the center of the board. You're
Yeah.
gonna pop up. You're not gonna get it perfect every time, but you are trying to land the center of the board. And I gotta tell you, I was at the harbor the first time that I actually successfully got up on this thing. And when I got up on it, it was like the speed coming down the face of that wave was
Yeah.
unbelievable. And riding that thing for a couple hundred yards, like of course, like Waikiki or someplace like that, that's like a super long wave. You've had a surf wave that long, but that's not what the wave was at the harbor. I mean, this was, you're up on foil, you're hauling, and you get to ride this thing so long. It was killer. Let's talk a little bit about, when you're looking at the gear that you're going to get to prone foil surf. You're obviously not getting out there on your wakefoil board. You're going to look at a different type of board, and it's not a surfboard either. You're trying to match like the right amount of volume in the size, so you can catch a wave and you can get up. Like, what was the first board foil setup that you had?
Yeah, the first setup that I had was it's called a Jimmy Lewis Superfly, 5'8". And yeah, I'm trying to remember what the volume is. I have to look it up, but a lot of volume. And this board in that size, in that dimension is, for me, I went to High Tech and said, hey, I want a prone foil. And they said, hey, you're going to want more volume and you're going to want a stable board to figure it out, right? So you're catching waves early, you're getting in pretty easy. It's not too thin, it's not too short where it's going to be really wobbly. It's just going to be a steady plank to get you up. And so
Just to make sure, Johnny, for I think for a lot of people who surf a lot, they know about volume, but just in case somebody's checking out our conversation and doesn't know a ton about volume, volume is a very simple concept. It is how much float is in that board.
right.
So when you lay on top of it, if there's a lot of volume, similar to like a surfboard, you're going to float higher in the water. Less volume is going to be you're going to sink more in the water, and typically you'll have less surface area. I just wanted to clarify that. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, the volume's important, and it's it's just typically more volume you have, the better waves that you're going to catch, or not the better, the earlier you're going to catch the waves, and the board's probably going to be more stable just because a little bit thicker, maybe little wider. And so that's the thing. And what I would say about it though too is, there's kind of a trade-off between catching waves. The thing about foiling is once you get the push and then you're on foil, you're not too much worried about your board volume, and then you want less. And so for me, once I figured out, okay, I can catch waves and I can control my foil and I'm comfortable controlling that foil, then I wanted to go down in size, because what you find is once you're up on foil, bigger volume, longer board, you have more swing weight. And so then you start paring that down, and then you have a lot more freedom. It's easier to pump, it's easier to turn, and you're more comfortable kind of catching the waves and doing that stuff. So what I typically see, especially out here, is you can go on Craigslist and you can find a lot of boards that are like mine, that were that first board for other people. And what's happening is people are progressing, right? They're like, hey, I want that shorter board. I'm comfortable catching waves. I'm comfortable riding the foil. I want a little more performance once I'm up on foil. And so that's the thing. I would say everyone that's foiling out here, I talk to them, you could probably even ask them, say, hey, do you have your learner board in the garage that you started on? And they'll say, yeah.
Yeah.
it's collecting dust. You want to borrow it, and then you can do it that way. But the bottom line is you're going to progress really quickly, especially if you have a background in surfing.
Yeah.
And you know how to catch waves on a surfboard and do that. And so at first it is important to have more volume, and then you're going to want to pare it down.
Okay.
So don't, I mean, you could go out and spend a lot of money on a carbon short pared down board, and I'm going to learn it come hell or high water, and you can do that. It's just going to, it's going to take a little more time,
Sure.
right? Because it's the yeah.
Well, and especially if you don't have a ton of days that you get to be on the water per year, in terms of most important is when you get out there, you want to have a good time. And so start with that longer board and that has more volume, and kind of, I always think of it as you earn your way up, right? Like, before I went and got myself like the, killer little rusty surfboard that I have, I kind of had to, in my mind, earn my way up a little bit. And of course, everybody has their own approach. But so you went from that 5.8 Jimmy Lewis, with the Wakefoil setup, and then you decided that you wanted to go a little bit smaller board. What did you go with there? And then the other thing I'm interested in hearing about is the rate of innovation that's happening around foils. It's impressive. Like, things are changing so quickly. I'd love to talk about Armstrong. I can tell you about my experience with MFC, but like, let's start with, what board did you go to after the Jimmy Lewis when you evolved? Like, what are you riding right now?
Yeah, okay. So the Jimmy Lewis 5.8, good learner board, a little longer, a little more volume. I think it was somewhere around 50 plus liters.
Yeah,
Lots of
sounds right.
float. Um, and I went from that to a 4.7, 4.8 KT. It's a carbon fiber board, so it's light. It's really light, lighter than the Jimmy Lewis. So yeah, it's about 4.8. I think it still has close to 40 liters, so it has volume, but it's kind of it's shorter, and it's kind of thicker on the rails. It has a concave, but yeah, it's just a pared down board. And then what you'll see out here is a lot of guys are riding even shorter, smaller volume boards. I mean, and you'll see that in pro, and you'll see it in sup. So you're seeing sup guys on really small, short sup boards. They almost look like a bar of soap. They got because they're getting the volume in the rails. They're not getting the volume in the length. They're getting the volume in the thickness of the rails, because what they're trying to maximize is their swing weight on foil. Because once
no, they're trying to minimize the swing weight.
Yeah, they're trying to minimize. Yeah.
Because you don't want
to minimize the swing weight, and so they're looking for a shorter board that once they're up on foil, you can turn it. You don't have this longer plank that you're trying to turn.
Yeah.
And then with the lightness, like all the prone boards now are this carbon fiber construction. So they're really, really light. They're really buoyant. Easy to catch waves in kind of like mushy white water. Get the push, and then you're up on foil, and then you're off to the races.
It's interesting on the swing weight when you're in the ocean, because I've thought to myself, behind the boat, does it really matter? In terms of a board is a board is a board. But I had the opportunity to take one of those KT boards out, and it was so light, and having that swing weight be lower, I just felt that I could carve harder, and just having less board there to deal with, it felt like I could just be just a little bit more extreme. I got a video that will come out and kind of demonstrate this stuff, but I totally get it. Like, I can imagine if you're going down a wave face, just having less board there allows you to get like a deeper cut in and just be more aggressive with how you're snapping back and everything else.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. As you progress to more advanced stuff, you're seeing some hybrid type stuff where, like, the shape of the board, they're pairing it with the foil, because, you'll also see there's all sorts of different styles of riding that people in kind of pathways, like, a guy that's more of a longboarder, he might be looking for different things than a guy that, their background shortboarding, and they're banging the lip and they're making steep turns. And so there's an application for all of that in different riding styles.
Mm.
But what's interesting is where you're seeing, some of the guys that are really pushing the innovation is they're taking their boards and they're paring them down. They're custom making boards. They're getting boards that, for what they want to do, they're in the critical section, steep section of the wave, banging that lip, banging whitewater. And so what'll happen is you'll watch them and they'll come in. It looks like a surf turn, maybe even more radical in some cases. They're on foil and they'll whip it around, but they also want a board that then can recover. Because what'll happen is they're managing that foil elevation on steep sections of the wave. So they'll come around, but then they want that board, they'll be low on foil, and they want that board to then recover. Or they're even kind of surfing, they're on a really steep wave on the takeoff or whatever, and they need the rail to be engaged, and they need just enough rail on that board to be able to do that. So you just see really radical shapes, you see really radical innovation. The rate of innovation is insane. It's almost frustrating, because it almost feels like as soon as you buy a new board and it's the hot new thing and you think, hey, this is the one, or a new wing setup, you just wait a couple months and you're like, oh my gosh, somebody put something out here that's better than that. And so that's the other thing I see with foiling is, once you get into it and you start to ride people's foils and test out different board shapes, next thing you know, it can get pretty expensive. And there's a lot of guys where it's like, you have all tons of different gear and that. So
it's like when's the right time to buy your iPhone? Because it's going to be obsolete in 6 months. The one of the things that at least we've talked a lot about is the innovation that's happening on the wing shapes. And so, maybe you could walk us through, the high aspect. And I know you recently got to try out the Armstrong. Can you talk a little bit about the differences? Maybe show a couple of those wings so we can talk about high aspect versus non-high aspect and some of the benefits that you get.
Yeah, sure. Wing shape, at the end of the day, I would say, the board shape makes a difference, but that's not where you want to put your focus in terms of innovation, because for the most part, if you can get into waves and you're comfortable on your board, the foil is what makes the difference. That's what you're riding, and it's going to give you different feels and different, it'll maximize different things that you want to do with your foiling. And so, a big thing right now is relatively recently, all the major manufacturers have come out with high aspect foils, and they call them high aspect wings, and they're different than kind of your traditional surf foil wing, and they provide you different things. So I can talk about that a little bit. I'll put you over on the side here, but here, like right here, this is, and the other thing is I've been able to try out a lot of different wings out here, because you'll have a buddy that has, I got this new wing, hey, let me try it. So I've been able to ride and try out a lot of different wings.
Cool.
And I have some of my own, but so right here, this is a Wakefoil, I think it's GL 180. So this is what would be considered a high aspect wing. And so looks like this. But what's interesting is you can see it's not super thick, right?
Yeah.
And it's wide. And so if I put it up here like I'd be foiling, it's also really thin here on the leading edge.
Oh, interesting. And there's not a lot of wing bowing, going to it. It looks pretty flat as opposed to like a,
Yeah, flat. Like, you know, if you think about a wing that's shaped like this, a high aspect wing, think of like gliders. You know, glider planes, they have those long wings and they're skinny. So a high aspect wing like this, it's going to be really, really efficient. It's going to be really fast. Okay. And so, you know, what's interesting about the high aspect wings is they're really fast. They help your pumping. Like high aspect wings, you can pump for days.
No kidding.
So
Okay.
yeah, so a lot of times on high aspect wings, they'll use the higher aspect wings for like downwind foiling, you know, and once they get up on foil, they want to sustain that, and they want to be able to pump, and they want a really efficient foil. So, you know, this is kind of your high aspect wing. What's interesting too is the lift characteristic is different. So, you know, slingshot GL 180. This
Go
is
foil. That's a go foil, right? Yeah.
yeah. I'm sorry. I'm
Oh, no
losing.
problem.
GoFoil GL 180. Here I have Armstrong. This is Armstrong 1550, and this would be considered more of a surf style wing. So this wouldn't be considered a high aspect wing, you know, and you can kind of see the difference here, right?
And can we look at like profile like that? Oh yeah. Okay. That's dramatically different when you look at those two shapes.
Yeah. And so something like this is going to allow you to turn, you know, really well, really efficient. Um, you know, something like this, like the turns on this are a little more drawn out. You know, it's almost like, you know, you're not going to be able to whip this around like you would a surf wing, but something like this is going to pump really well. The big
Does it?
difference that I found, a big difference that I found though too is just in your lift characteristic. So this is gonna you know, lift pretty well, but it almost kind of lifts on its own, right? So, you know, it's got a really nice linear lift to it. It kind of will come up on its own and kind of find its where it wants to be balanced. These high aspect wings are a little different in that they almost require input to have the lift work. And so what's interesting is if you're going from your traditional surf wing to a high aspect wing, you're gonna feel like you don't get as much lift. So if I'm riding a high aspect wing, I'll have this more forward in my mast position because it almost responds to input how you want to lift it, if that makes any sense. So it's really like you bring it up and then that's where your input is, and then you're giving more input and then you can lift it. So it'll kind of stay in the water column. High aspect wings aren't typically going to shoot you out, you know, shoot you out of the water, because it's almost like I'm getting lift, I'm getting speed, I want to lift up. It almost, you know, it takes your input.
Yeah. Now, do you think with those differences in terms of the elevation input, there's probably a little bit of trade-off in stability. Is the high aspect better for a beginner or not? Like if you're coming into the sport and you want to buy a wing, which one of these would you go for?
My opinion is I would say the high aspect wings, maybe not the best right out of the gate for a beginner.
Okay.
You know, like borrow your buddies or get a surf wing, or even some of the older wings, like you know, like the Eva, the older GoFoil, and there's a lot of them around, right? Okay. Because of that rate of innovation. But if you're going out your very first time, a high aspect wing is going to be a lot for a beginner to handle, and because it takes a lot of, you know, kind of input to be able to work. It's a little tougher for a beginner. I feel like when you're beginning, you want a wing that's gonna kind of lift on its own. It's not gonna, you know, a larger foil like this almost will have its own kind of set of training wheels, if that makes any sense. Like the older go foil wings, the Eva and those, like, you know, you get it up, but then it it almost has like a governor. If you ride those older wings, you're like, why is it not going faster? You know, I'm up on foil, I want it to go faster, but I feel like I'm kind of on a governor. If you're learning, that governor can be a really good thing, because if you're on a high aspect and you get that thing up on foil, you might find yourself going so fast, it's kind of hard to handle, you know, the subtleties of learning how to ride a foil.
Right,
But,
right.
yeah.
And so that gives us a sense in terms of high aspect and surf, or, you know, surf foil in those differences. I think one of the things that's interesting too is seeing what is happening on the rear foil, the rear wing of these things. I mean, guys are taking what is a somewhat expensive piece of equipment into their garage and making their own modifications. Like, why are people doing this? Why would they try to, you know, cut down the size of that rear stabilizing wing?
Yeah, well, what they're finding is they want to create the riding characteristic that they want, and so by chopping down their tail wings, they're able to loosen up that foil. They're able to get it so that they can turn it and throw it around in more critical sections of the wave, and you know, kind of up the performance game. And so what's interesting is, yeah, I have a couple different tail wings here. This is my Armstrong tail wing, but, you know, this is a higher aspect tail wing, right?
Oh yeah,
So
look at that.
like,
Can you put the Armstrong up next to it so we can see the difference in those two shapes? Yeah, look at that. So the high aspect is basically, it's flat with those wings at the end, as opposed to, you know, that surf shape. And that kind of, I guess that matches what the front wings do, and that makes sense.
yeah, and these will add a little more stability laterally. And
Okay.
this one's actually pretty long. This is like 17 inches. A lot of the guys out here that are prone foiling, they're riding a version of this, but it's pared down. It's closer to this size,
Okay.
right? But yeah, the innovation in the tail wing is tremendous, because it really will change the riding characteristics of the foil. And so, like, you know, you mentioned chopping them down, and yeah, a lot of guys are chopping these. And if you look at the Armstrong, I don't know if you can see this. Okay, you see that little?
Oh,
Can you see?
oh yeah. There's like a little scissor thing where you could.
There's a little scissor thing. Yeah. And so, you know, I think the manufacturers understand too, like they can't make a wing, you know, wing set. We're going to make one here, and then we're going to make one here, and we're going to make one here.
Yeah.
So I think what more of the manufacturers are doing is here's your tail wing, you know, and if you want to chop it or customize it, you know, we'll give you a little guide. We'll say chop shop, chop it right there. And what that'll do in that spot is, you know, you kind of lose this, so you might lose a little stability, but you might want to lose that stability, because then you cut it down here, it's going to become really loose. And it's also too, like, you know, once you get really good at foiling, it'll be your input, right? Like,
Yeah.
you know, it's not like the foil is going to be correcting itself because it has these out here to balance it out. You're providing the input to correct it and to set it at the angle that it wants to fly at, right?
I love the fact that these guys are, you know, obviously the manufacturers are spending time with, you know, tunnels and water things, and they have all their test riders out there, a lot of them in Maui. Armstrong, I think, is out of Australia, and then you got Slingshot, down there in Hood River. And those guys are testing all that stuff. And then you got guys taking out their bandsaw and sandpaper and cutting it to see what it is that they like, right?
Yeah, you see a ton of creativity. I mean, and the other thing is you can take maybe some of your older, more obsolete, you think they're obsolete, or, hey, this doesn't have
Yeah.
the characteristics, but guess what? I've already got a wing here. It's got the holes to go on the mast. What if I just modified it? What if I just cut it? What if I put it on a different mast and saw what that does? And so you see that. You even see, there's guys out here that are shaping their own tail wings. They know how to work with resin and carbon, maybe in their garage. The latest I saw was Sky Rama. He's always out here at Guardrails, one of the craziest, best foilers out there. But he had these tail wings that went on the Armstrong fuse, and I said, "What is that?" And he has a buddy that's custom making tail wings. The tail wing he was riding the other day, they had taken two surfboard fins, two fins.
Yeah.
So think of, I have two surfboard fins here. Here they are, and I'm gonna just create this middle section to stick two carbon fins off the side. And then he put in the screws, put the resin, put the thing together, and it's a brand new tail wing with completely different riding characteristics, pairing it with like the 1550 or the smaller front wing. So it's really cool. And then you see these guys on this modified gear, it's like the Bride of Frankenstein, but it's the bleeding edge in foiling. And then, you're not going to argue with it, because typically, I'm paddling out on the shoulder and, Sky's spraying me with water because he's, right in front of my face. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think the coolest thing about, foiling, and I've seen it across all the different disciplines of it, is that in a lot of ways, it can make some of these, of course, you can push any sport to limits, but there's some dynamics around foiling that make it gentler on your joints so you can do it later in life. I know for the guys who are kite foiling, they're zooming across the water and you just don't have the slam down. And the same thing's happening in terms of windsurf foil. I know that at least when I was out there in Guardrails with you, a lot of those guys they're great, they've been in the water for a while, they're great suppers, but those sup foilers, they're doing that into their 60s, into their 70s. It's a sport around foiling that you invest and you put your time in, and it does take time. It's not easy sport, but whether that's kiting, wind foiling, sup foiling, prone foiling, wake foiling, they all work across, and you can do some really interesting things at all age levels and all abilities after you build that competency. And so, who knows if anybody's still listening to us, John? I mean, it's only the foil junkies who actually would stick around long enough to be like, hey, this is interesting, high aspect versus surf aspect. But I mean, it's clear. I know you love foiling, both prone and the boat. I love it too, and I can't wait to go into different disciplines, to bring it. I think is there any last message you want to leave before we end this overly long conversation of foiling?
Yeah. Well, I think you brought up a good point in that, yeah, at Guardrails, there's guys and gals, 50s, 60s, and they're bringing whatever discipline, that they came to it with, and they're getting out on the foil. So, the last thing I would say is that, and I think we touched on it in the beginning, is it's really pretty new. And so the thing that people need to understand is that, yes, there's a learning curve, but it's not an impossible learning curve. Especially, if you like being in the water, you've done something, you've done windsurfing, kiting, surfing. Everyone is relatively at the same starting point. and with foiling, once you get past that learning curve, once you get comfortable with it, it's just an eye opener, and you say, wow, this is, there's nothing like flying the foil. You have longer rides. It is easier on your body, because the bottom line is, once you're on foil, you're flying, you're floating,
Yeah.
you're flying on a wing, and you're not having impact a chop or whatever. And so, it's really unique, and it's really really great. And that's the thing. It's get out and learn something. And it's inspiring being out here, and maybe even during this time where it's like, okay, there's not much else going on. There's a bunch of stuff locked down, but you can actually get in the ocean. And I'm seeing a number of people, they might be furloughed from their job, they might be out of work, but you can still get in the ocean. And so they're saying, hey, you know what? I need to get out there and learn how to do this foiling. And so they're learning.
Yeah.
And they're getting it. And, you put in a little bit of time, and next thing you know, you have a new thing to pursue, a new discipline, and it's really great. So
I think it brings back those old disciplines like a windsurfing, and reinvigorates that overall sport. And I think, kind of building on what you're saying, is that a lot of times the learning, obviously it's always really fun to be performing a sport towards the top end of it. Not that, any of us can ever get to like where the professionals are, but, you get very, very competent. But I would encourage people, as they kind of begin their progression through foiling, to enjoy the process. Like, don't get impatient. I know for a lot of people, to go behind the boat once or twice, and they'll have it porpoise, they get a little bit scared, and they'll leave it in the garage for another year or two. It's just let that process happen. Know that it takes everybody a bit of time, but once you've made that investment, it pays off, and just all kinds of fun that isn't just going to be for that discipline you're doing it, but all the different foiling disciplines.
Yeah, well, the cool thing about it is once you do learn to ride the foil, it doesn't take much of a wave. It doesn't take much wind. Once you're on foil, it opens up a wide array of stuff you can do. So I think I would encourage anyone to get out there and learn how to do it. And in fact, if they're around me, whether I'm here or I'm in Seattle, I don't know, reach out to us. I'd be happy to take anyone out and show them how to do this safely and get into it. Because once you see that discovery, once you see the look on somebody's face when they're riding the foil, it's priceless. Because there's nothing like it.
Yeah, it's a life changer. I mean, we saw it. We took a couple people out a couple weeks ago, and these guys were immediately hooked. And they've done other water sports. It's just so much fun. So, Johnny, I'm going to say aloha, as you say in that land of yours. We miss you over here in the mainland. I hope you make it back here soon. Bring some of those foiling friends with you so we can put them behind the boat, do some cool stuff.
Yeah.
I hope to get out there soon and continue to progress my prone foiling, because I love it, really enjoy it. I also want to get on a sup foil and try that too, because that looks like a blast as well. So take it easy, Johnny. Thanks for your time, and we'll talk to you real soon. All right.
All right. I'll give you the double shaka in closing, but yeah, aloha, mahalo, and we'll see you out in the water.
Sounds good, brother.